Yeah, so it's been about a week since I last uploaded a video, and I've been sort of processing how I want to talk about this road trip that I was on. And I'm going to get to that in the next video, but today is July 19th. And it's the beginning, and I'm not, like I said, I'm not super knowledgeable about all the astrological stuff, but there is a lot of big energy going on with these outer planets and this basket, Barbeau basket, and it seems to be a lot about opportunities for sort of new social systems and innovative change and sort of big energies afoot. And so it seems like the right day to have this conversation. It's a bit of a reflection. In the week before I left for the trip, there was an event at the Star Portal, and it was with a gentleman who is a healer here, I think chiropractor, but energy worker. He goes by Dr. Dan. And I've heard about Dr. Dan for a long time, but I hadn't ever met him or, heard him speak. And so there was this event and I went, and it was quite moving. I think he had what seems to be, he didn't really describe it as a near-death experience, but that sort of state of like disconnect with the real world and information and sort of guidance on life. And one of the messages, he had little cards that he gave out, but was essentially this idea that when we have disharmony in our life, that ultimately we have the opportunity to take responsibility for that, and then to, connect with God, source, through our higher selves, to kind of put our trust, rather than trying to force it and fix it, to put our trust there and just know that whatever, like, have faith that the next steps will unfold to our sort of soul's journey here. That seems like a good approach. But sometimes it's hard to own our responsibility of disharmony when things are hard, because we're already feeling a little hurt. Through the past week or so, I've kind of come to that place that, and this seems like a good day to talk about it with these archetypal energies. I was never, like I've said this before, a super astrological person, but the more I've sort of sat with the idea of higher level quantum information physics and coordinates and crystal lattices, and there are many aspects that astrology seems to match up with, that it's, and looking at the work of Arthur Young, that these things that at first glance society tells us are very far apart might not be so far apart. And so initially, when I came down here, I resisted quite a bit. And now I found a place, not that I've just stepped into somebody else's way of looking at things, but in my own lens of looking at things from sort of an information theoretical standpoint and making sense from patterns and systems. Yeah, it kind of makes sense, right? Like what I said previously about the quilt and the pixel quilt, the Tula pink pixel quilt, the bird pixel quilt. And like, you might show up as a little green square in a certain part of the quilt surrounded by other squares. And that might feel confining initially, but I can also see it as an enabling constraint. And then what you quote on top of it, like that pattern, is sort of our free will. So yeah, I've been spending some time thinking about these things, and I don't know, not to be too personal, but actually it will be personal, because I think part of what my soul journey is here to do is to kind of fulfill out my pattern that I've come in with. And from a human design standpoint, I'm a 3-5, which is a martyr heretic, which seems like kind of a booby prize. But I think essentially it's about exploring around, bumping into things, getting hurt, making mistakes, resolving things, and then trying again and integrating that into some form of wisdom. And then I think the martyr aspect is where a focus of other people's projections, in terms of that we're there to try to solve things. And when we're unable to deliver on that projection, then we become sort of scapegoated. So part of this is, for me, is to sort of go through and own up to that maybe my task in this moment of great societal change, with all these outer planets moving around and shifting from the Piscean age to the Aquarian age, is to learn how to make mistakes, and then learn how to spin the mistakes into some sort of cool opportunity. And that's a little hard because as I grew up, I was very much, I've mentioned before, in the program, overachiever, outside expectations of me, of like, I did it to myself, right? Like I was trying to fit into to society's expectations, which I did for quite a long time till my life said, no, like that's not what you're here to do now. And so it's shifted. So now I'm learning a bit about taking the bumps and integration, which worked really well with Dr. Dan's, like, take responsibility, like, yeah, own your mistakes, but they're your raw material to work with. So martyr, heretic. And then the other piece in the gene key stuff is, so it gives you like 4 coordinates that are sort of part of the I Ching, and they're paired, I guess. And so I have 2 pairs. The first one is 5 and 35, which I can't remember which is which, but essentially the shadow side of that is impatience and hunger, and that those come from a place of fearfulness. And I can definitely see that because I don't like uncertain things, and I tend to grasp at things and try to control things. That's been sort of my habit. And I think it's from, I don't know why it's from a place of fear, because I mean, all in all, my life up until it got a little weird was not a fearful place. And I think, I don't know, maybe there's some other soul journeys I've had or other past lives where I was more fearful. But if you're able to transmute that, like the upside, the potential upside is pretty awesome. And it turns into like timelessness and boundlessness, which is really kind of fascinating to think about. This ideas I've been having about what is time and what is space and what are opportunities and how do we work with sort of quantum potential, and how can we work with higher dimensional information fields in a way through embodied language systems or something like that. So I would really like to get past the impatience and the hunger into that timelessness and boundlessness. But I think that there's some aspect of this road trip for me that was pointing out that I'm still kind of grasping at things from a place of, I don't know, not being worthy or trying to make something happen that isn't mine to make happen, or to push in ways that are not helpful. It's part of my process. Like, you know, I still hopefully have a good number of years left to figure it out. So I'm not there yet. It's a slow process. And then the other pair is 63 and 64, which is kind of interesting because that's the bookends of the gene keys of the I Ching. So 1 and 2 is the beginning, and 63, 64 is the end. And it's about it's about the mind, really, and the aspects of the mind, of logic, but also of imagination. And the logic going from having a sense of doubt, which I do, like, internally have a lot of doubt of, like, who am I? Am I doing it right? What am I doing here? Why do things like, there's a lot of questions that I have, but then transmuting that to truth. So doubt to truth, and then confusion to illumination. And so I guess part of the trick is to be able to inhabit confusion and doubt in a way that allows for the illumination and the truthfulness to flow in, and to hold that space without a frequency of fear, I think, which is this, you know, the previous piece about the human design. And the other thing about human design is I'm a projector, and I have no inner authority, which is something like environmental authority, which I guess ultimately says that I'm supposed to talk everything out with people, which I'm sure is incredibly annoying because there's only a pretty small slice of the world at this point who's interested in or knows enough to hear me talk and not become exhausted. So, but the goal is, it's not to actually provide answers for me. It's simply to, like, witness so I can talk it out and then make sense of it for myself. So I think in some strange way, these YouTube videos are serving the role of my environmental authority, but so I can talk to myself and maybe to some of you who care to listen, but you don't have to provide any answers, which is all really good. So that is sort of my coordinates in whatever, the tulip pink pixel bird quilt, of like what I have to work with. And just spending time this week before thinking about the trip, I kind of, as I've said before, tried to be an overachiever, but the goals of achievement tended to be from outer society. Although I am very internally driven, the setting of the goals wasn't necessarily internal to me, and there was a lot of striving there. So when this trip came up, there was a there were some opportunity I perceived. Now, so because we can only really speak from our own personal perspective, this is what I'm realizing. I had a I don't really use AI that much, but I do put stuff in Google, and now a lot of the Google is like Google AI. So I ended up doing kind of a long discussion over many topics on this one thread with Google. Usually it's just a one-off, and I'll pull something and then plug it in. But and I'm not saying I'm taking it with a healthy grain of salt, but it was a really interesting experiment because this conversation went on over a couple of days, like 2 or 3 days, and I was asking about things, not because I was curious what its take would be versus my take. And it was a lot of things in my maps and themes that I've been playing with for years and years. So I wasn't really asking so that I could reground myself, but I was curious if there were new angles or interpretations that would be worth considering, which seemed like an interesting use of it. But at some point it was so long that it was freezing up. And so I started a new tab and I asked a similar question, and it had this really pat answer that was totally different from the answer in the much more extended version that had happened over 2 or 3 days, because clearly it was learning my world model and speaking to that. In some ways, yeah, like pandery or whatever. Like I can see that, and it was useful to experience it because I've heard of it from other people. But at the end, just thinking about, like, we all live in world models, right? So of course, in this sort of Gordon Pask cybernetic version, if you're asking a question, the engineered intelligence wants to know who you are before you can answer. Like, it can give you an answer that is meaningful to you. And so if we're able to sort of shed that there's only one quote unquote reality, that maybe all of us are living in our own flavor of reality, and that that's okay, that it's not propaganda, it's not like you're being steered away from the truth by fake news, but it's simply like you're building a world model, what's relevant to your world model. And in these two tabs, I could see that it was, and I don't think, like I said, I was asking it because I was curious what it would say, with again, a grain of salt, as opposed to I was seeking wisdom from it per se. And yeah, it was a really interesting process, because the more I go back and I look at Project Genie, the Google Project Genie, it's phenomenology. It's about how we are all seeing the world, like the universe or source as the great cosmic elephant, that we all have our hands on different parts. And so the goal isn't to like have everybody go grab the trunk or grab the tail and say that that's the elephant. It's simply to like, how do we integrate all of these different views? So that was super interesting. In the scheme of planning this trip, I perceived, again, this is the phenomenology part, I perceived that there were some things on the horizon that would be interesting opportunities that might serve to enrich the chances that this idea of this playcat geo, which would be our playcat geo in a box, this idea of imagining or holding space for it to come in, some sort of new infrastructure that would be a communication infrastructure that would be embodied, that it would involve math, that it would involve culture, that it would allow us to network intelligence at different scales with different kinds of teaming, could be possible. And so in looking back, the first element of the trip was in Memphis, and there were some challenges that were immediately apparent. And I think that in the entire trip, I do this often, I pack too much in, right? I was trying to hit all of these buttons, do all these things, like visit all of these places that I had wanted to visit in Tennessee, and then connect it up with this, opportunity in Indiana and different things. Like, I wanted to do it all, but I overplanned, and I didn't leave enough time for serendipity and onto poetic synchronicities. And So that was, again, my impatience and hunger to get the thing done and to check the boxes and to try to maybe realize a goal that I had in mind that may or may not be actually what the goal is. And sometimes the more we grasp at something, the more it slips away from us. And so that's sort of the space that I was holding. That was part of it. That was like my projection. Yeah, and now I'm back to the confusion and doubt, but also sitting with the, like, maybe this is the process and that it's okay to be in this process. And so I'm just going to connect this to a film. And I don't watch a lot of movies. I can't remember how I even came across this movie, if somebody told me about it. But it was around the time I had visited Arkansas. I was intrigued by the fact that hot springs seem to have these interesting place names having to do with mineral deposits, and not just quartz crystal, but like vanadium and aluminum and bauxite and different things. And this was a film based on a book. I'm curious, I actually want to get, I think it was part of a series. So this was the first book, called The Portable Door. And it was sort of a Harry Potter light sort of book. And it's interesting, I can't remember the actor's name, but he was one of the lead actors in the OA, which is intriguing. And the premise of the book is ostensibly about synchronicity and Jung. They don't say Jung specifically, but they talk about synchronicity in particular. And what caught my eye when I was watching the film, there's two young people, in their late 20s, and the young man, he needs a job, and he's bumbling around, and he's waiting in line to apply for a job at a coffee shop, and a dog steals his scarf, and he ends up chasing the dog into a back corridor and arriving in this sort of warehouse space with this company where he has an interview, but he doesn't know he has an interview. And there's a young woman who's there, and she seems to know what's going on. But he gets called into the interview process around a big conference table with these, people in suits, and he doesn't even know what the company is or why he's there. And they're grilling him with questions, and he's sort of distractedly looking up in one corner of the room, and the head of the company says, what are you looking at? What are you looking at? And ultimately he's like, well, I mean, that's a map of London. Can't you see in the stain in the wallpaper? And then he starts identifying different parts in the wallpaper. And so he gets bundled off, but then immediately he gets the job because they're looking for someone who can see the patterns. And ultimately, they're looking for diviners. And the young woman they're both hired to be interns, but she's on the quote unquote fast track program. And her name is Sophie, and his name is Paul Carpenter. And so what's interesting about Paul is, well, there's Paul in Christianity, Saul and Paul, but Paul is supposed to be a humble person. And Carpenter is someone who is building things, putting things together. And then Sophia, like the idea of world building. But Sophia is on the executive fast track, and she's not really interested in what Paul has to say. And Paul doesn't even know what the company does. And he's confused. And they're up in this attic, garret, and they still don't know what the company does. And someone tosses down across these drafting desks these topological maps and says, you need to find the bauxite on these maps. And bauxite is Bauxite. And it's the ore that is used to make aluminum, or as Sophie would say, because she's British, aluminium. And the main investor, well, about 95% of the bauxite ore used to make aluminum in the United States is between Hot Springs, Arkansas, and Little Rock, in the town of Bauxite, which I have visited. And actually was given a small sample of what they call bird's eye bauxite. And it's, again, like birds, like flying. And so Alcoa bought up all this land in Arkansas to make their aluminum. And 95% of the planes that were built in World War II in the United States were built from aluminum that came from bauxite ore in Arkansas. And a major shareholder in Alcoa, the aluminum company of America, was the Mellon family. And the Mellons were a big banking family in Pittsburgh. And then Paul Mellon, who was in the CIA in World War II, he was in charge of implementing the National Gallery of Art, which is archetypes. He donated his alchemical library to Yale. And he and his first wife, Mary Conover Mellon, were deeply connected to Jung and set up the Bollingen Foundation and published all of Jung's works in English as well as numerous esoteric texts. So when I saw the portable door after being in Arkansas, knowing about bauxite and seeing, like in this movie, if you were going to ask them, essentially, and what they find, they couldn't find any bauxite on the maps because it wasn't labeled bauxite. But as it turned out, what Paul was able to do, as Sophie left the building to go on some errand, was that he was able to douse it with his hands. And so he was able to put his hands over the maps, and then actually like an electrical sort of spark came out where the bauxite ore was on the maps. So he was a diviner. And the important aspect of this was the idea of embodiment and embodying divine access. And as part of the film, the setup is the company J.W. Wells being like depth psychology, like the collective unconscious. These synchronicities are run by people in concert with the goblins who are underground. And they have no digital computers. They use everything through pneumatic tubes. And so that there's this flow state, this air-based flow state to synchronize with physical artifacts like lost posters or book stories or different things, synchronicities that shift people's inner intuition. And it's been going on, according to, the plot, for centuries and centuries, the goblins and the people at J.W. Wells to orchestrate major epiphanies and things like the moon landing and splitting the atom and all of these things, but the goblins get no credit. And then the son of John Wells, who was the current president of the company, his son was like a bad seed, Humphrey. And John Wells had him sign over his soul to him when he was 12, but Humphrey was a bad seed, and he ended up luring his father into this plenum, essentially, which is called the Nether, and through a door, and he shut the door, and who closes the door keeps the door. And it turns out this door is the portable door, and it's a towel. It's a textile, it's collapsible, it's topological, and time interfaces with it. But in the Nether is this space with many, many doors, the ceiling, the floor, it's sort of a cube. And all the doors have doorknobs, like old-fashioned round doorknobs that glow like a photon. And if you go out a door, you just come back in another door. You can't actually get out. And so it turns out the two interns get tricked into going into the Nether with John, the Grand Wizard, who is trapped there, and they can't get out, and there's no way to get out. Only Paul, because he's the kind of diviner who can focus his intention and will, he's able to open a door that goes somewhere, and then they escape. And so if you imagine the knobs being like our inner light, our divine spark that connects us to the all, right? The idea is to be coherent in that place and to be able to focus that as a portal into other information fields, in my opinion. I think they don't say that in the movie, but that's sort of the implication. And then later he's able to use this ability to open a door into the bank of the dead in a secret place and address some soul contracts that are part of the fine print. And so to me, there are many interesting aspects of topology, reality bending, coherence, relationality, care, dysfunction, like learning as a process, becoming as a process, that are packaged in this movie that's just kind of looks like a cute little tween sort of movie for the most part. And it's interesting because it's actually Henson Productions, and about a week before that I had watched a movie, The Labyrinth, with David Bowie, which is a much older movie, but it was also a Henson production. So there were these two Henson productions, and where did the Muppets all fit in? So just to close this sort of Barbeau basket day of me reflecting on getting into talking about this trip, that I had some ideas about what I thought it should be, because I'm kind of a person, my past habit is to have a plan. I'm the, as, I don't know, maybe it's stereotypical, but like moms have a plan. We get like, there's the lists and there are the things to get done. And, maybe I was channeling my old, like planning the family vacation, and maybe I over planned, or I had certain expectations. And part of it had to do with a playcat geo in a box. And part of it because the trip was going to take us through cave country in southern Kentucky and Indiana, the karst area, and flow states, was the idea of Persephone. And again, I still have this separation from my child. If I were to pick, I feel like I have this resonance with the archetype of Demeter, that the natural world and the plants, and then having this separation that is unresolved. And part of it was to try to work through some archetypal intentions to be like, hey, like I would like to try to resolve this in a positive way. Although maybe my intention wasn't so clear that I wanted it to be positive, and it was just, maybe it was to be reconnected, and the reconnection meant that sort of a recurring loop of the previous dysfunction that had happened, which is unfortunate. And so, I just want to take the time to say I accept the responsibility for the one, me having some ideas about specifically what I wanted the trip to be about, and two, the pushback that it ended up not being that, and then three, how to transmute that into some sort of wisdom that I can learn from, and maybe other people can learn from. Because I was conjuring more the Sophie, right, the fast track executive program, but in the fast track, she ended up signing some fine print that set herself up for being a pawn in this Humphrey Wells plot to essentially sort of manipulate people in not a good way. And so maybe in my forcefulness, out of like impatience or hunger of trying to get the thing done, I opened myself up to sort of a dysfunctional, maybe opened up isn't exactly the right word, but I resonated with the dysfunctional, I brought into being like a dysfunctional situation, which was, again, not great, but you learn, right? And then on the other hand, Paul Carpenter is oblivious. He doesn't even know what the job is, what the company is, what he's doing. He's just going with the flow, literally. And in that building, being open and not confined to any specific expectations, to tap into a deeper aspect of himself, and then to bring a level of coherence in partnership with Sophie, because they become sort of a romantic couple, and they use the portable door to explore all these different wonders of the world. And one of the places that they spend time is sitting on this beach with these big rocks. And so it's the idea of the groundedness of these stones, and then the dynamic system of the surf pounding the stones, and like how those two things resonate with each other. So in some way, Paul is like the fool in the tarot, the fool's journey, to go through the different processes, whereas Sophie is much more specific in her expectations, but in being very specific and working within an existing societal program, ends up setting herself up for something that isn't the optimal outcome, right? And so in looking back at this movie, and then thinking about how I operated within the context of this trip, because usually when I'm off doing my ontopoetic things, I'm just doing them by myself. And then sometimes like growing it into this is something for me to learn, involving other people. On one hand, like how it's challenging to build a good team, or to build maybe not good, maybe good isn't probably the best word, but a resilient team or a creative team. Like, how do you make a container, right? This Barbeau basket. What does the basket look like? How do we make a basket that we can carry what we want to carry? And in some ways, maybe it's easier just to make your own basket and carry it around. Like I literally, a lot of the hearts that I make, I have a basket that I use to harvest my produce, and it's my basket, and I carry it around and I do stuff with it. And that's easy. What gets harder is to expand the basket into a team. And I wasn't good at that this time. And I hope I'll have a chance to do it better some other time. But that has to do with me, and I take responsibility for that. So, yeah, so those are the main things that I want to talk about. The next time I'll actually speak about the trip itself, but I wanted to sort of lay the groundwork there. It's super duper hot in Arkansas right now. I think we're in the upper 90s and hundreds, although the hummingbirds are here more in force, and I'm super excited. And a few of the swallowtail butterflies, which had so many last year, not so many this year yet, but a few are coming. And I think for now, probably the next 8 weeks are going to be like how to keep things alive in the garden. I did finally buckle down and buy a sprinkler. It's supposed to come later today or tomorrow. And sadly, I mean, it's totally my neighbor's, jurisdiction, but there were 2 very large shade trees in the front yard next door that were taken down, or in the process of being taken down this week. And so that was energetically hard, especially because one was very close to the property line. And so I felt like, its root system underlies my garden, that we had some resonance there. And it was a gum tree, the sweet gum tree with the aleph, the little sweet gum balls. And so that's a big difference, right? And so there's a whole section of my quote unquote shade garden that's going to be in full sun now. So I don't know if I can keep stuff alive until the fall, but I'm in the process of ordering full sun plants. And a lot of my garden looks really great. Like the zinnias and the marigolds are super happy. I didn't overcrowd them this year, so that's a good thing. And I'm finally getting some okra. I built a fence, although even when I left on my trip, I somehow left the fence open. Like there's like a little netting place that I kind of like have a little hinge and I can open and close it. So I built the whole fence and then left it open while I was gone. But I planted some new baby okra, and I have about 5 or 6 plants that are going, and I ate the first 2 pods. That's not really enough to cook, so I just like pop them off and eat them raw, but that's cool. And this trombosino squash, I guess. You can't really grow summer squash in the South because there are squash bugs and vine borers, and they'll just kill the thing straight away. But there's different kinds of squash. The trombosino, you can either pick them small, and they'll act more like a summer squash, or let them get bigger and it'll be more like a butternut squash. So those seem to, knock on wood, be doing pretty good. And then I'm also growing some Seminole pumpkins, which are small pumpkins, which the vines are giant. And I see buds on them, but they're all male buds. So I haven't seen any little pumpkins yet. But those are going. And the cucumbers, these China jade cucumbers are my favorite because they don't need pollination. Every flower makes a cucumber. So those are doing well. And the deer, I have my beans, this year I really wanted beans. Next year I'm going to have to fence them in. But I have these raised beds that have a structure on top, and it's like this little stretchy containment zone. And so I planted a bunch of bush beans before I left, and I sealed them in. And then I was getting a little slack with because you have to open them up for them to be pollinated. And so I would unzip and do the flaps up during the day. And then once or twice I forgot to do them at night, but it was fine. And I was like, oh, maybe it'll be fine. And then nope, the deer found them. So they munched on a third of the bean leaves. And so now I have to go back and close them up every night. But live and learn. It's a dynamic process, and it's been really nice. I've had friends come over, and I've been loading them up with eggplant and tomatoes and these shishito peppers, which are awesome. And so yeah, the garden is doing well, and now I have even more sun. It's interesting because there really aren't any other trees except for maybe 5 houses down. So the sky is really opened up, and we get some kind of big storms here. And I think that's why the neighbor wanted to take the trees down, because they were quite large, and I guess they were, we get some crazy storms. So the possibility of having it land on your house, it's scary. But yeah, the sky is way bigger now. So it'll be interesting to see how that changes things. But yeah, I gave it a hug, and the tree people laughed at me, but I gave the tree a nice big hug. And I kind of imagined it sending its like soul energy down into its root system, which is still under my garden, and then it can still kind of nurture and sustain my garden from below the ground. Because there's so much that goes on underground, right? So anyway, so thanks for listening to me about my making mistakes, integrating them, trying to resolve confusion, doubt, impatience, and hunger into something that is more illuminating and trustworthy. And hopefully I will make more progress on that as I go along, because yeah, the future, this Barbeau's basket, the social change. I mean, I think I'm here to provide some sort of interesting, unconventional input. I think that's what they to the martyr or I can't remember which one, but it's like people project onto you, but you can distill some dysfunction into some unconventional solutions. And so I still do think that this playcat geo in a box or whatever it might be could be some of that. And I'm in the process of reading. This is the other thing. So my friend Star, she was inspired. She does the flower essences. She shifted from doing nuclear medicine in Santa Barbara to flower essences. And she visited Findhorn, and this woman, her name is Michelle, although it's spelled Machaelle, Michelle Small Wright. And she wrote a book called Behaving as If the God in All Life Mattered. And very good book. The first half or third of it is her sort of traumatic early childhood, which is a hard read. But then it talks about essentially how her sort of ability to maybe dissociate or distance herself from the real world and to go into other dimensional spaces allowed her to have this really rich relationship to nature and manifestation. And then the book that I'm reading now, it'll be backwards online, but it's called Dancing in the Shadows of the Moon. And it's from the mid-90s. And then this one, it even gets more interesting because, you know, if I had read this 5 years ago, it'd be like, this just seems really out there. But now, I mean, essentially, like there's an aspect of herself that is astral traveling into another soul journey, working with Eisenhower, some copy of Eisenhower and these other men on sort of the transition from the Piscean to the Aquarian age and dealing with war and peace and energies. And in it connects in with nature in her garden at Paralandra. And so, you know, she and Star have been quite lovely role models for me in moving forward with grace and trust in the benevolence of the universe, I think. And part of it is just how do we get out of our own way, or me, like how do I get out of my own way and let the things happen that need to happen, even if they might seem unconventional. So I'm really grateful to be in a place that can hold alternative viewpoints with care and open up possibilities. And what I'm realizing is instead of trying to grasp outside for acknowledgement or to plug into an existing structure, really the key is maybe to follow Michelle and Star and Paul in the movie and simply be in coherence with oneself, like be in coherence. And in this time of really great energy and undergoing great change, believe in the good story, believe that the good story can come. But it is not always easy because, like I said, it's taken me a couple weeks to process my confusion and disappointment with how the trip went, although there were many aspects within the trip that were very interesting and educational. And the emotions that came out of it for me were about how I had set things up for myself. And that's something that can be changed. I mean, I guess that's the nice thing is if you take responsibility for your situation, then you can actually change it. If you project responsibility for your situation onto other people, you can't. What I've realized is you can't change other people. I mean, it's kind of silly to try to change others, but you can shift yourself and your own story. And so that is what I am in the process of doing, and integrating a lot of really good things that came out of the journey and the quest, even though it unfolded ultimately in a way that was not initially imagined from the outset, but maybe it was all exactly as it was supposed to be. I have a friend here. She has some sort of clairvoyant abilities, and I was debriefing briefly, and she's like, no, it all happened just the way it needed to happen. So just put your trust in that and keep going, right? Keep going and keep trying to be coherent, and be coherent in yourself first, and then maybe be coherent with other people. So I have an addendum to put onto the talk that I just did. I was on a phone call with someone, and I was like, oh, I forgot to say this. So, I've been interested in this idea of category theory lately. And it mostly comes out of my background in understanding blockchain, and that, I came from the space of understanding blockchain as linking to digital identity and metadata tags, things listed like linked to social impact finance, but then also realizing that there's an aspect of relationality that's held in how information is organized and in relationship to each other, that category theory is a lot about context. And so this idea of social graphs and nodes and vertices and how lines connect to each other is really relevant. And actually, in some ways, I feel like the maps that I've made for a long time are sort of phenomenologically category theoretic. And so I was maybe doing category theory for a long time, and I was not aware of it. And so there's something that I wanted to mention as a concept to sort of that relates to what I had said earlier. And it's called the Yoneda lemma. I think that's how you pronounce it. Yoneda, that's the first word, and then lemma, Lemma. And essentially, it's this idea that a vertex, or a dot, an object, is defined by the nature of all of the relationships to it. And it really hit me because when I finished reading Babel 17, the culmination of that sci-fi novel, which is about essentially this language, Babel 17, how it foundationally changes how you function in the world, one of the main characters who kind of brings that into the story, he is a ex-felon who's escaped from prison and a really violent guy, and they call him the Butcher. And Raidra Wang, who's the Chinese poet captain of the mission, is trying to engage him in conversation and is realizing that the language that he uses, which is Babel 17, does not have a word for the concept of the I, like I and you, the separation. And so there are so many aspects that can't be discussed because there's nothing to pin them on. There is no I, which is kind of like this idea of the Yoneda lemma, in that the object of itself is sort of no consequence. It's merely almost like an attractor basin for all of these other things that are relating to it in some way. And I thought that was a really interesting idea, because I've been kind of, as a projector and this martyr heretic, the idea that in some ways, like, not that every object is a person, right? Like an object could be the quartz bed of Garland and Saline counties or whatever, and it could in of itself, and the relationship of all these other objects to this quartz crystal bed could say something about what it is. And I think in many respects, people who are part of the metaphysical community here recognize that there are people who are drawn here for a particular reason. They might not really even understand why, but they're attracted to this place, to be here. I feel like in some ways my life shifted, and so that I would end up being here at this point in time. And so it's a basin, in that all of the nature of the people who arrived here, or the trees that populate it, or the insects that are on it, or the crystals themselves, are all part of defining the it that it is. So you can imagine what that might be like instead of you swap out the crystal bed and you put in, a person, an agent or a concept of an agent. And if you take, so you might have the agent looking out relationally to all the relationships that it has, but then you could also kind of deconstruct like Babel 17 style and say there is no I, like you get extracted and you're over here. And then the thing is all of these relationships that are projected onto the object itself. And just holding the tension of, I'm not really even sure that one is true and one is false. Are they both equally true? What does it feel like to be occupying that center space of relationality? Looking out at the relationships that are involved in your life, relationships to people, to objects, to places, versus the projections looking in, sort of like all the hands on the elephant. And the tension between how you imagine your life is from the inner perspective, being either in alignment or disalignment with the perspective of people who are seeing you from the outside and how you fit into the story of their existence and narrative, which how they see you and how you see you might be very different things. And anyway, so it's something I've been holding for a while, this idea of the Yoneda lemma and the attractor basin. And I think that there is something in the sort of Schumacher Buddhist economics, the Joanna Macy mutual co-arising aspect, that there's something to being able to shift from the Babel 17 version where there is no I and everything is interpenetrating to a version where you can step back and reclaim your I-ness, which Butcher is able to do eventually. Like they're essentially, they break Babel 17 with paradox. And so then he remembers that he's actually the son of a baron and was recruited to be a spy on behalf of the good guys, and then got infected with his Babel 17, and then he lost his language ability. So he actually has two sets of relationships. One is the relationship of himself, the relations that are centered around him being an escaped violent ex-felon, and but then there's the other set of relationships around him as the son of a baron who is trained to be a spy. And then he has amnesia, actually. He gets amnesia and then he forgets who he was. So there's like layers of relationships that are, some of which are foregrounded and available and some of which are not, but they're still there. They're just not accessible. And then how that relates to us as beings, or even maybe as souls that might have different iterations or different timelines. That we have, as I have this great constellator sculpture that my friend Gigi made for me, and the projection, right? The projection into 3D reality, and all of those being eyes, and which one is the eye that you're in now, right? And the one that you're in now might not have full availability to all of the eyes that are out there surrounding you. And then I'm feeling like maybe in this basket moment, there might be something that's moving forward, that we start to reclaim more of a conversational element with these other I versions of ourselves, which is something that the Dancing in the Shadows of the Moon, the Michelle Small-Wright book, sort of touches on, these soul rays and how they interpenetrate. And the rays feel very much related to category theory as well. So for what it's worth, it might be useful to look up Yoneda lemma, imagine it in terms of identity and relationship and phenomenology, and are you inside looking out or outside looking in, and what is the paradox of those two differently held views, like intention, and maybe like some of the outer views are you looking at the you now, or like the soul version of like you looking in at different versions of yourself, like that's like some sort of mirror house thing. That's interesting to think about. And then like landing in this language of Babel 17, that some of the ability to do it or not do it is embedded in a communication infrastructure. And I'm increasingly feeling like there's some aspect of this Playcat Geo in a box that's linked to a networked cognitive light cone, and that it involves this dissolution of the I for an interpenetratedness at a certain point for some sort of communication, maybe with a higher level information field, and then the pulling back and then the reintegration of the I as individual agents. It's not a permanent dissolution, but it's the ability to step in and step out. Maybe it's that that group, uh, Yuki Irohara with the AI, Japanese AI company that was talking about immersion and bracketing. Like, how could you immerse and then do the ego deflation and get coherence and then interact with the field in a different way, and then step back out and bracket and then reclaim your identity and perspective and then compare notes with other people. But I think that somehow we don't have a good word for what that looks like, and the current foundational structure might look like economics, and then this big shift that's underway in this sort of basket moment in terms of social structures relates to that. And eventually we'll get a better word other than economics and token trading, but I feel like that's kind of part of it. So anyway, word of the day, unidilemma. And yeah, it's an interesting exercise to hold that view of like us looking out and the view of others looking in, and how networks of relationships create structures of through ideas or emotion. And then, yeah, just being able to trade sides, because sometimes I do feel like there's aspects in my journey that how I perceive myself, well, I know it's true. Like, how I perceive myself or in a certain situation is not how others perceive me in a situation. And it's not necessarily that one person is right and one person is wrong. It's just we're holding different stories in different contexts. And there's so much that's left unsaid and is held in the body at an unconscious level that's attached to like all of our past histories, that it makes that communication more complicated. But also, I think if we can step back and acknowledge that that's maybe how our operating system works, it gives us more room to maneuver and resolve tensions or challenges relationally. So yeah, who knew, right? Computational sociology and category theory and maybe boxes. So anyway, happy Barbo Basket Day, and hopefully next week I will get a couple of installments. The first one will be about Memphis, Tennessee, and there's a resonance there, I think, with the Portable Door movie and the idea of the Bank of the Dead and the Giza pyramids. So, all right, till then, all right, bye-bye.